It is January 31st, 2017. I'm Israel Anderson, and we need to talk. Well, please like and share and comment and get this around. If this adds value to your life, then it will probably add value to somebody else's as well, and they'd probably really appreciate you for sharing this with them. Well, the new Supreme Court Justice has just been selected. Now, it doesn't mean he's been appointed yet. He needs to go through the process before the Senate, but it's very, very likely that he is going to be, he's going to make it through the Senate in very quick order. There's not really going to be any delays here. Everybody loves the guy. Conservatives, liberals. Now there's a few of the SJWs that are shitting their pants right now, but really most people actually love the guy. So it looks like he's going to be the next Supreme Court Justice without any delays at all, and that is Judge Neil Gorsuch. Now, of course, I'd love to tell you everything I know about him, and I already have, because I don't know anything about the guy, really, and I don't make stuff up. So, I'll do a little bit of research over the next few days and see if there's anything interesting that I should bring to you, and if there is, then I'll bring it to you. But, just looks like he's going to be a very conservative, very literal, textualist interpreter of the Constitution, and I recommend you go and watch the speech that he gave after the president introduced him this evening, and just listen to the way that he edifies everybody around him. Wonderful, wonderful character, immediately very obvious there, and so that always impresses me. Now, one of the things in business here in America that's really caused so much of a problem is not the tax code. That's bad. But the real problem here is the regulatory burden and the cost of the regulatory burden. It strangles business. Now, when Donald Trump, before he was president, he went to Carrier and he sat down with them and he started talking to them about how he wanted to wind back regulations and reduce taxation, he discovered something very interesting. I guess because he just has the team to take care of all the legal BS on his behalf, he wasn't so aware that for small business and medium-sized business owners, the greatest burden, the greatest cost of doing business in America is not the tax code, it's the regulatory burden. And as an entrepreneur, this is something I've had to deal with all the time. I refused to hire people for my data recovery company in Boulder because of the red tape we had to go through for every single employee. It just wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the headache. I would rather have worked longer hours than employ somebody to do it for me that I could have trained, because the red tape was just absurd. And as a libertarian, it angers me in having to even deal with it, to think about it, to look at, it really does get ridiculous. So this needs to be reduced. And that's what he discovered when he sat down with the Carrier people, and he came out and he actually said, this is interesting. I've just met with these guys and I'm surprised that they said the number one thing they need assistance with is reducing the regulatory burdens. Well, that's exactly what he started campaigning on more seriously. And before he became president, before he was elected, he mentioned in one speech that he wanted to reduce regulations up to 75%. It's a massive amount. After he was elected, he repeated that figure one more time. And then it was about 1 week ago now that he said he wants to, and he actually said this in front of the business leaders that he had sitting there in the White House, and he said, I want to reduce regulations by 75% or more. Wow, that's quite incredible. Now, he does stress that in doing so, we're going to still look after the environment and we're going to look after people, but there's so many ridiculous regulations that make absolutely no sense. I remember watching a video. It was a short documentary. I think it was made by Reason Magazine. I think they made it. And it was like 5 or 7 minutes long. And it was about an importer of lobster. And he was a convicted felon because the lobster that he imported wasn't packaged correctly. and I guess some game warden or some person whose responsibility it was to enforce these asinine laws noticed that the packaging was not correct, and that, I mean, how that could possibly be a felony is beyond me. But that's how bad it is. We've got all these regulations that have nothing to do with protecting people. A lot of them are introduced by massive companies that can afford the regulatory burden, and they lobby for stricter regulations to put their smaller competitors who cannot afford to meet that regulatory cost, puts them out of business. And so there's been a lot of this going on over the years. McDonald's has been trying to do this and has been able to wipe out a lot of the smaller burger joints by just increasing the regulatory burden, and they can afford to comply, and a lot of the smaller players cannot. So what happened yesterday is very exciting. He mentioned this on the campaign trail. He mentioned this after he got elected, but yesterday he wrote an executive order that states that for every new regulation, two old regulations must be removed. Now, Canada did something very similar a few weeks ago. That's exciting too. They decided that for every one new regulation, they would get rid of one old regulation. Well, that's something at least. At least it's not going to increase the regulatory burden. But here in the United States, we're one up in Canada, as always, and it's 2 for 1. That's pretty exciting. So for every new regulation that is introduced in the Congress, they must get rid of 2. Now, you'd think, well, they're just going to get rid of the easy ones first. I've even said that. I said, well, they're just going to pick on the easy regulations to get rid of. And as they get rid of those easy regulations, then maybe in time they'll start getting into more meaty ones. But actually, no, the way the executive order is written is this, that the cost of a new regulation must be calculated. The cost of old regulations must be calculated. And so there must be a 2-fold cost decrease. This is phenomenal. So in other words, let's say, just for argument's sake, say this new regulation is going to cost a business $100 a month in compliance costs. Well, we need to remove 2 regulations from them that are the equivalent of $200 a month in regulatory cost. Now that's fascinating. Now, I created an image, and I created it October 18th, but I just reshared it again on my page. And it went a little something like, the reason I support Donald Trump is because if he can have a massive reduction in regulations and taxation, it's going to be one of the most libertarian presidents we've ever had. This is going to be one of the greatest advancements of liberty that America has ever seen in its entire 240-odd year history. And that's for real. That's exciting, folks. That's really exciting. Reducing the regulatory burden is immense. Now, this plays also into this whole thing about the tariffs. And look, I'm not for the tariffs. I have explained why the tariffs are going to be there and the way they will work. But a lot of people immediately jump to this argument that's a vacuumous argument, because it's an argument in a vacuum. It's not considering all the other relevant facts, where they'll say, well, if we're going to put a tariff on things, the price of goods in this country is simply going to go up. That's not necessarily true. If we didn't touch the regulations and we didn't touch the tax code, that may be true. But let's take a look at a couple of things real quick here. Let's say we put a 35% tariff on American. Now, and remember, these tariffs are not on all imports. It's only for an American company that's getting something outsourced overseas and bringing it back. All right. Example, this is not going to apply to an automobile manufacturer that is a foreign company and they're importing their cars here to sell. There's not going to be any tariff on that. Right. So this would be like Carrier, the air conditioning company, an American company. They're going to build the AC units in Mexico, then they're going to import them. They'll be hit with the 35% tariff. And I'm not trying to justify the tariff. All I'm doing is explaining it. So give me a second here. Now, what will happen for Carrier if they're suddenly faced with this 35% tariff and they decide to keep it here instead, and a lot of my libertarian peers are saying, well, then the costs are going to go up because it'll be cheaper to make it in Mexico and we should do it there because it's, whatever is cheapest for the consumer. Well, I think that's a little short-sighted anyway, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be more expensive. Why? Because there are three main costs in the business, right? You've got the regulatory costs, you've got the tax burden, and you've got the cost of labor. Now, the cost of labor obviously is going to be cheaper in Mexico, but if we can reduce the regulatory burden substantially, 75% or more, if we can reduce taxation down to these levels that he's talking about and reducing the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 15%, now he has said 15 to 20%, and there's going to have to be some wiggle room there. Getting to 15%, that's going to be a massive decrease in incoming revenue to the federal government, so that's going to have to be considered. But then also, personal income tax is going to be lowered, and the average family is going to have $400 to $600 a month of extra income a month, right? Well, that's a huge amount. That's a huge difference. So when Carrier now makes the air conditioners with the current labor cost here in the United States, that's not going to change. Well, actually, no, I'm wrong on that. It will change because it's also going to be affected by the tax cost and by the regulatory cost. All right, and especially with Obamacare being repealed, that's also going to reduce. So the cost of labor here is actually going to go down as well. I need to rejig my argument here. It's actually more favorable than I realized because the cost of labor in this country is also going to decrease. It's going to decrease. So when we reduce the regulatory cost, when we reduce the labor cost, when we reduce the taxation cost, these are the three biggest expenses in business, operating costs. There's a very good chance not only will these air conditioning units not go up in price, but they're going to go down in price. They're going to go down in price. Do you get that? Because we're chopping at three of the most expensive parts of doing business. Got to give Donald Trump credit where credit is due. The guy is absolutely brilliant. There's no doubt about that. So introduce a new regulation, two new ones go. I mean, it's going to sound like, hey, let's introduce more regulations because that means more of them are going to go away. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'm very, very, very excited about it. Today, Donald Trump met with drug companies in the White House, sat them around, and he spoke straight up, pretty bluntly to them and said, we're going to get the cost down. We pay more for drugs in this country. Well, I don't touch any pharmaceuticals whatsoever, and I think you're mad if you do. But I know some people think they need them. Okay, but let's get the cost down anyway. So let's get the cost of these pharmaceuticals down as much as we possibly can. And he also said to them, we're going to reduce the regulatory burdens at the FDA. We're going to speed up the approval process. And we're going to allow the drug companies to test their drugs on terminal patients that are about to expire. Now, this is something the FDA has been blocking, which is absurd. And Donald Trump even used the example in his little talk. It's like you've got somebody who's got 4 weeks to live, and here is this, Bayer or Merck, Pfizer, they have this experimental drug, and it's not tested enough. It may kill the patient. It's like, and they'll admit that. We don't know. It might kill the patient. Yeah, but the patient has 4 weeks to live anyway, and he wants to try it because why the heck not? So makes a lot of sense. It's very rare that, it'd be pretty hard to make a drug that's going to kill somebody in that period of time. So why aren't we doing that? Well, Donald Trump's going to make sure they can. That's a great thing. That's a fantastic thing. So everything we're seeing here, my libertarian peers get very upset at some of the things he's doing. Oh, that's not libertarian. That's not libertarian. Listen, my friends. The greatest level of liberty for the maximum number of people. What does libertarianism mean for you? What does liberty mean? To me, it means the greatest level of liberty for the maximum number of people. You may not like the method that is getting us to that end, but I just want the greatest level of liberty for the maximum number of people. And if you're not on board with that, perhaps you want to reconsider whether you're actually a libertarian. Now, I do want to say this, and I wrote this on my Facebook, and you can go and you can read it right there, but I'm going to read this out here. I don't say this in judgment. I say this in mercy. But the majority of libertarians today are partisans and very far from being free thinkers. They're so engrossed in electoral politics, electoral success, that they are oblivious to the communist coup d'etat that has been slowly taking place in the US. Many of them even mock such an idea, some because they are blind to it and others because they're actually part of it, though mostly unwittingly. Not all, though. The assassination of JFK was more than the death of a president. It was an act of war. And ever since, the battle has been intensifying. Trump is the new JFK. He is the new George Washington. He is the first in a generation to recognize the coup, who also has the ability to overturn it. We are at war. Philosophical discussions are good and needed, but so is the recognition that we're at war, and that the hour of winning through counter-education and argumentation has passed us by. A different strategy is in play, and clearly most libertarians don't like it. But this enemy of communism will not be reasoned with. Revolutions are messy affairs, and this one will be no exception. Realize quickly that this is the Second American Revolution, that we are at war with a clever and cunning enemy far more insidious than King George. I hope that you will recognize this sooner rather than later and join us in this fight. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please go to israelanderson.com. You can find all of my social media links there. Please like, comment, share this all around. Share it to somebody that you think may get some value out of this. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you so very much, and I will see you tomorrow.